Hi, this week I want to start kind of a sub-series of videos where I do my best to explain some ancient heresies and also why they're important for us to know today so long after they've been officially condemned. Now, in order to understand why I think this is a worthwhile thing to do, I have to explain a little bit of how I began to first understand the notion of heresy. Now, many of you may not have quite the same experience that I have had, but I suspect that at least a few of you will have had one or two similar experiences. Now, before I was ever a Christian, I had heard the word heresy, but I don't think I really understood what it meant. If you had asked me about heresy, I would have said probably that it was a term that people in power use as an excuse to physically abuse those people who disagree with them. It would have reminded me of bits from Monty Python's Flying Circus and Mel Brooks and talking about the Spanish Inquisition. By the time I got to seminary, I knew the names of at least a few of the classic heresies, not least because some of the Christians on campus would accuse one another of being heretics. And I may have even known a little bit about them, but I wasn't always sure why it was that it was a problem for Christian faith. And I remember in that first year of seminary, sitting in my ancient and medieval church history class, learning about the heresies kind of officially, and learning how to explain to our professor what was bad about them. But I remember thinking that some of them, I really wasn't sure why they should be condemned quite as hard as they were. And it was really only when I was about halfway done with seminary and I started to dig deeper into the works of T.F. Torrance that I began to understand not only what the heresies were, but really why they were such a big problem for Christians. In particular, it was Torrance's book, The Trinitarian Faith, which has actually just recently been released, and so it should be easy to find. Well, in this book, Torrance goes through the Nicene Creed bit by bit and tries to explain what the ancient theologians had to say and why they felt they had to say it that way. For me, it was an eye-opening experience. Up until that point, I would have told you that heresy was nothing more than a club to beat people into submission with. Afterwards, I began to understand that originally, heresy was meant to be a pastoral diagnosis to help identify teaching that would have the effect of undermining people's faith. So this is kind of an introductory video for this sub-series of videos on the ancient heresies I hope to make. And in them, I hope to not just give you kind of a textbook definition of what they are and why they were seen as bad once upon a time. My goal is to explain the heresy in a way that makes sense to people in the church today, and so it can become a little more clear why it has been destructive to faith in the past and also in the present. This is an incredibly important task, not least because as I got deeper and deeper into understanding the ancient heresies, I began to see how they are very much alive and well today, not just outside of the church, but also very much among Christians. I remember specifically when I first started getting excited about the doctrine of the Trinity and how all the ancient heresies kind of undermined it, I began to make a few posts on Facebook about it, and I remember having some responses basically saying, yeah, okay, but what's the big deal? The church dealt with this a long time ago. Isn't this all in the past? In fact, if we are afraid of naming and criticizing heretical tendencies in the church, although I'm always going to be more critical of teachers and teaching than I am of lay people who are just doing their best to get by, then we're going to prevent ourselves from learning from the past, and we're going to condemn ourselves to making the same mistakes into the future. To label something today as heresy or even leaning in the direction of heresy is the kind of thing that will get you a lot of big pushback. To some people, to even use the language of heresy marks you off as being a backward, closed-minded person who belongs more with the Salem witch trials or the Spanish Inquisition than you do in the modern enlightened church. And yet, if we treat these ancient heresies as just being in the past, as if they were long since dead and buried, we may not be able to see them when they begin to creep in. And just like any disease, if we're not able to identify and recognize the early signs, we will have to deal with it later, only it'll be a lot harder to take care of then. Again, the fact of the matter is that in the early church, the idea of heresy was never meant to be a big stick to beat somebody with. It was meant to be a pastoral diagnosis that somebody was teaching something that would tend to undermine people's faith in Christ, and as such, it had to be named and called out as being destructive. So my goal in all of this is never to shame anybody, but to act as a kind of diagnostician to help shed some light on some things that may not seem like a big deal right now, but could down the line cause destruction. So this is what I hope my sub-series on the ancient heresies will accomplish. I'm hoping that it will help in some ways to make people aware not just of what's been said in the past, but also to reveal some ways in which it might still be alive and well in our own lives today. So the idea in all of this is not ever to be judgmental, not ever to get the torches and the pitchforks out, but to help us to be a little bit more educated and a little bit more aware of what's going on so that we can deal with things before they take on a life of their own. It's my hope that no one would ever use these videos as a way to attack or criticize somebody else, but that it would make us progressively more aware of the tendencies towards heresy in our own way of thinking, because that's how we're really going to make a difference in our lives and the lives of others. Now, if that sounds even remotely interesting to you, and I hope that it is, although I know that some people almost have an allergic reaction to talking about heresy, then make sure you pay attention and catch up when we have the videos on the various ancient heresies in the weeks to come. Well, that's all I have for this week. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to take up, please send me an email at pastorstevik@gmail.com. If you've liked these videos or if you find them engaging in some way, please consider liking and sharing them on the various social media platforms. And if you'd like to subscribe to the channel on which these are posted, it's youtube.com/tstevik1. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.